Coming up on OGP, the New York Football Giants fall short against the Eagles on the road. Brian Daboll makes a halftime decision at QB, and officially, the Giants are eliminated from the playoffs. We dive in coming up next. Yes, my friends. It is OGP, the One Giant podcast, where I am your host, Adam Armbrecht, covering not only the Giants, but also the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast with Doug Norrie and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast with Danny McDonough. It was a Christmas Day game where hopefully everyone got to enjoy the holiday in spite of the New York Football Giants coming up short. Though depending on which faction of the fan base you fall into, maybe this is exactly what you were hoping for. Another loss that pushes them further up the draft board, something we'll discuss on the back end of this episode. But first, inside the game, right? It ends up being a disappointing loss, a comeback chance, maybe something that you weren't anticipating being possible, given that the Giants were down 20-3 at halftime. 33-25, a last-second interception from the Eagles in the end zone. There's a lot of situations here, maybe throughout this game, that we feel like calls didn't go the New York Giants' way, but as we probably said all season long, when you don't come out with a certain energy and a certain drive and a certain focus and a level of execution, you're going to fall behind, even to a team like the Eagles that have certainly struggled. So, whether or not you wanted the Giants to win this game, they had a chance to, and they come up on the short end of it. Now, there are pass interference calls inside this game that we think should have happened that didn't. Maybe the last play excluded there inside of the end zone, because while we can listen to Tyrod Taylor after the game saying, hey, if you're going to call it on the first play of the game, you want it to be called on the last play of the game. That can be true in this moment when the Giants are on the wrong side of it. But we also know, going back to last year with the Washington Commanders, or going to any game, when it works for you, you tend to say, yeah, well, that's football. When it doesn't work for you, you want it to be called evenly. You want it to be called the same way throughout over 60 minutes. And that could be true. And it just feels like this is more of a problem for the NFL, because it's one or the other. Either it's well established that that's the way we're going to do things at the end of games, and then you don't anticipate, and no one should have a gripe about it, or we're going to call it tight, or we're going to call it the way we call it in the first, second, and third quarters. Kind of maybe a footnote to this one overall, because again, the Giants were down big at halftime, and Brian Daboll made the switch over to Tyrod Taylor from Tommy DeVito. Now, if you listen to some people, and maybe even my co-host Andy Makowitz, who will be in this week, and we'll see if he wants to bring up this gripe again, it never should have been that Tommy DeVito got benched in this game. Two schools of thought. One, you run the risk of maybe winning the game. And then two, are you hurting, quote unquote, the ability to assess this young undrafted free agent? I disagree on this. I said coming into this weekend that I thought this is exactly how it could play out, and that the Giants and Brian Daboll would have this option. Start Tommy DeVito, see if he's still looking good, give him a chance to get some reps, play in a hostile environment. And if it isn't working out, you have the veteran on the bench that you can go to if you want to win football games. We can debate whether or not Brian Daboll coming out immediately after the prior week's game against the Saints and the loss and saying, yep, Tommy will be our starter next week. Was that the right decision? Maybe, maybe not. Was it the right decision to start Tommy DeVito against the Saints, knowing that you still had this mathematical path? And while Tyrod Taylor was not perfect in this game by any stretch of the imagination, you certainly saw what a veteran quarterback looks like when, on a given week, the offensive line holds up a bit. Saquon Barkley, we'll talk about running with some consistency. You say, yeah, if Tyrod Taylor starts this game, you have a chance to win this game. What is the track that you want to live on here, right? Then there's actually also a coaching aspect to this that I think matters as well. You go inside the numbers, and there's certainly some individual plays that worked out well here. Just on the QBs here quickly, and why it's a mixed bag at best, but certainly Tyrod did a nice job hitting a couple of deep passes. 7-16, 133, 8.3 clip for Tyrod Taylor. Touchdown, interception. Tommy DeVito, 9-16, just 55 yards. That's really the key thing that you hone in on here. Although we know that because you get Darius Slayton on the 69-yard touchdown pass, you'd be talking about 7-16 for what? 70-ish yards. It wouldn't have looked strikingly different if he doesn't hit that play, Tyrod. but he does. So it counts. And then it looks like this. On top of which, something that we've talked about before too with Tommy DeVito, whatever you thought he was going to be or not be in the grand scheme of things, he played to just a 14.1 QBR. Tyrod Taylor is 77.7. And that's going to have the opportunity because you're gripping and ripping it. You're trying to get the comeback and you're making some big plays. But Tommy DeVito hasn't had great QBRs over the course of his run starting for the Giants this season. You go back and you look at it, the 14.1 against Philadelphia, the 13.4 against the Saints, which maybe is the indicator that you shouldn't have started him if you're talking about winning against the Eagles. 79.2 against the Green Bay Packers. That was the highlight. Other than that, only one other 30-plus QBR, and that came against the Commanders, a team that we know has been a susceptible defense throughout. So that's your case for what Tommy DeVito has been and why we say the 3-game winning streak, it's fun, it's a nice moment, but in the end, we feel like we understand that there's a clear ceiling to this player. Did Tommy DeVito do damage to the idea if you believed that he could be the backup quarterback going to next year, that he could fill in at the start of the season if Daniel Jones isn't going to be back and healthy, if the Giants draft a young quarterback and he's not ready to go yet, regardless of what the Giants do? Are you ready to comfortably step away from the Tyrod Taylor conversation as returning to the Giants, which is minuscule percentage at best right now, and move forward saying, well, it's Daniel Jones, it's Tommy DeVito, and whatever other choice we make? I don't know. I think at a minimum, you also serve the other agenda, which is, and maybe fans don't love this either, serving two paths here, serving two agendas. Tyrod Taylor is going to be a free agent quarterback. He's 34 years old. He's still going to be, I think, regarded, if he can stay healthy, one of the better QBs on the market to back up your starter around the league. I mentioned played to a 77.7 QBR. He played to a 76.4 against the Saints in just 4 passes. Let's be realistic. But throughout the course of this season, when he came in against Miami, 58.8. When he played against Buffalo in a losing effort, 45.9. When he played against Washington, 14-7 in the win. Both these quarterbacks had nice performances there, 50.7. Sprinkled in with some clunkers like a 10.5 in relief against the Jets, just 7 pass attempts. So you throw those out probably. Just like the other ones, realistically, only threw 1 pass against San Francisco and only threw 2 passes against Dallas in week 1. So in games where he's legitimately played, let's just say, 10 plus passes, if you don't want to include Miami or not, 58.8, 45.9, throwing 36 attempts, throwing 29 attempts against Washington, 50.7. When this guy is given the opportunity to fully run the offense for an extended amount of time, he plays decent ball. That's really the point that we're making here. Doesn't mean he's a part of the future for the Giants, but that's why you do it. And I don't think either agenda, if you were pro Giants tanking and getting the best draft pick, then you were happy that Tommy DeVito started. And you were also dismissing the idea that he was winning football games for this team and it meant something, anything more than just a fluke. If you want the Giants to win games, then you go all the way back to the Saints one and you say it should have been Tyrod Taylor after you got lucky on a 3-game winning streak with Tommy DeVito. So in the end, the coaching staff, the organization ends up doing the both and. Yep, we gave a little more to Tommy DeVito. We maybe dodged accidentally winning a game against the Eagles. We officially get eliminated from the playoffs. And we also do the culture move of allowing Tyrod to put some good film on tape. I don't know if that's true or not, but it seems to be what was served here yesterday, because it's hard to think that Tommy DeVito was going to go out there and win this game. I don't know if Tyrod was either, but if it's purely about winning football, then Tyrod should have seen the field probably a lot sooner. I'm fine with it either way that you slice it. We'll talk about also Brian Daboll and his decisions around the QB spot. We'll talk about individual performances on both sides of the ball here, because that's what it comes down to. And that's probably the reason why getting Tyrod in there for the second half of this game certainly mattered, even if fans don't necessarily realize it. Now, one thing that you could be checking in on if you're any of these New York Football Giants players is, where are you from a well-being standpoint, right? Because it's another 5-game season right now. Could be 7, probably going to be 5. Saquon Barkley may be thinking about his well-being, as his post-game comments were pretty honest, pretty direct, and pretty dejected. And so as Saquon Barkley has gone across this emotional roller coaster throughout the season, from getting tagged in the offseason, wanting the long-term deal, coming in, playing some good football, getting injured, winning some games, and then ultimately finding himself as a player who is on a team with 5 wins late in the season. But if he goes over to potential.com, he could be going ahead and taking a free online assessment tool, basically a survey that sets benchmarks and tracks your well-being and even gives you coaching tips to improve it and track that progress over time as well. What would it look like if Saquon Barkley had been using this all season long? It's free to individual users, as I mentioned, and maybe something that the Giants as a whole should invest in to see where some of their players are as they work their way towards the back end of the season. You can go to pietential.com. That's pietential.com and be visualizing, analyzing, realizing, and actualizing your well-being. Check out pietential.com today. I mentioned Saquon there. So much was made about closing the gap this season. That was kind of a theme for the Giants organization on the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys of the world. Well, they didn't do it. If it's any indication, they did not do it this year, in spite of their best efforts, in spite of the players they signed in the offseason, the guys they brought in through the draft, whether it's injuries or otherwise, they did not do it. This is a team now that even though you only lost by a touchdown in this game and lost in the closing seconds, and certainly you could look and talk about the Eagles and where they are in their season and what it looks like for them as they head towards the playoffs. But you got blanked 40-0 to open the season. That has no injuries tied to it. That's a 100% healthy squad. Daniel Jones at quarterback, all the bells and whistles. You lost that one in a disastrous shutout. You lost to them again, 49-17. You've now lost to the Eagles 33-25, and you'll meet them at the end of the season. Boy, I would really like this game to matter for the Eagles. Because if you are a Giants fan or if you're someone covering the Giants and you say, well, they have closed the gap. And listen, when you look over a schedule, the record is the record, the games you play, and when you play teams, it is what it is. So you give nothing back to the sense that, well, the Eagles have been struggling of late. And you could have seen this as a get-right game when it's 20-3 at halftime. Could be blowout city. Okay, fine. If you want to carry that narrative. But the Eagles are still 11-4, right? The Cowboys are still locked in there at 10-5, looking at worst a wild card, can still be playing for the division. So you haven't closed the gap. Not really. And that's basically what Saquon said. And he's not even talking about just the last couple of seasons. He said it. Last decade. It just has not been a team that has been able to beat these guys, these Dallas Cowboys, these Philadelphia Eagles, these better teams in the league. Now, on an individual level coming out of this game, before we talk about coaching and the question that was posed maybe a few weeks ago and didn't feel like really a narrative worth continuing, I do wonder if it's bubbled up again here a little bit. On an individual level, on this game level, when you look at this one and you think about turning over to Tyrod Taylor for the second half, I do believe there's a key reason to do it. So the first thing is you have 23 carries from Saquon Barkley, 80 yards, 3.5 per clip, touchdown, only along a 12. So this is a grind out game for him. It's one thing that we talked about in recent weeks of, yeah, we can say that it's, bang your head against the wall and then hit the home run at some point. That's great. But you do want to see that he can be a consistent runner between the tackles. And this is a good game overall, and generally speaking, for the offensive line. The weird, false start on John Michael Schmitz, which made Brian Daboll irate on the sidelines. It's a little head nod. It's it's the motion from the guard to tell him it's time to snap. Does he move his hand a little bit on the ball? All these things. Consistency is all you want in those penalty calls. But overall, it was a solid game from the offensive line, and it afforded Saquon Barkley to have some success. Why do you make the switch over to Tyrod Taylor? Listen, maybe it's just for the exact moment that you saw connecting with Darius Slayton down the sideline for a 69-yard touchdown pass. 3 targets, 3 catches, 90 yards. So just 21 yards without that big play. But does it matter? Yeah, of course it matters. Darius Slayton is an interesting player. I saw a lot of things about this after the game, even during the game. Why are we being sold Darius Slayton as a number 1 wide receiver? I don't think that we are. He is the number 1 option right now for the Giants. And you can debate whether or not Wan'Dale Robinson should have seen more like we've seen in recent weeks. And we got in this one, another quiet game, right? 3 catches, but sub 20 yards. Doesn't really say a lot. Jalen Wilson, Jalen Hyatt and his development. What does that look like? Where is he, right? What do you have expectations for him going to year number 2? These last couple of games are going to matter for that. And was starting Tommy DeVito a mistake if you wanted to continue his development? There's a few different agendas that you can kind of talk about here. But for a player like Darius Slayton, who, understanding the last couple of years were rough for him, drop percentage is high. This year, just 2 drops, just 3% drop rate for him. And, 90 yards in the touchdown here. A week ago, 4 catches on 8 targets, 63 yards. Very quiet couple of games in the wins, by the way, against the Packers, against the Patriots. But he had a nice one against Washington, 4 catches, 82 yards, had the touchdown. He's had a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, now 5, 6 games of 60 plus yards or more on the season. He has over 600 yards on the year. And with a couple more solid performances down the remainder of this season, we could be talking about a guy that once again is going to have 700 plus yards for his career. And he's had done that every single season except for one, right? 2021, just 339 yards on just 26 catches and 58 targets. And that was the one of 2 very bad years from a drop percentage standpoint. I don't know if he has a future with the Giants. I know that we don't need him to be the number 1 wideout, but these plays matter. He can do these things for this team. And ideally, you want to drop him in behind a true number 1 and drop him in behind a Jalen Hyatt in his second season and put him in the mix there along with Wan'Dale Robinson and say, yeah, he just becomes a weapon. Talked about the same thing with Isaiah Hodgins, right? Who fell off the map here effectively, had the touchdown from Tommy DeVito a week prior against the Saints. But by and large, we're saying, hey, this is the deal, right? These guys are not 2s and 3s or 3s and 4s. They're maybe you could live with Darius Slayton as your number 3 wide receiver if you have the right guys ahead of them. You could live with Isaiah Hodgins as your 5th wide receiver. So I think that, a guy like Darius Slayton can still have a role here. I'm fascinated to see what it looks like for the offseason. There's not a lot of wide receivers in recent Giants memory that have done what he's done. It may not seem like that big of a deal, but to be a guy, if he can get there, to have 700 plus receiving yards in 4 out of his 5 years, given everything that's gone on between injuries, between QB play, all the factors that are involved there, he still found a way to be pretty successful. And nothing is matched up to that rookie year, even in spite of some of the drops, right? 84 targets that season, just 48 receptions, but he was a big, big play guy, 8 touchdowns. Over the next handful of seasons, he's now totaled with that touchdown this past game 9, right? So it took him 4 more years just to equal that benchmark that he set in his rookie campaign. But I still think that there's talent there. So a game like this mattered for him. A game like this mattered for Saquon Barkley, as I said as well. Game like this could have mattered for Evan Neal. We didn't talk about it when we're coming into it, but he got put on the IR. So it mattered in the sense that you do not get a look at this kid. You do not get a chance to see him continue to develop as well. So that was a bit of a disappointment in that regard. You saw Justin Pugh give you maybe the little bit of juice, right? After Tyrod Taylor takes the elbow to the head, there's a personal foul penalty. You can go 2 lines of it. You want your guy protecting him. I don't like the fact that the NFL has penalties that are 15 yards on one side and 5 on the other, yet the penalties offset. Why don't you just go ahead and mush them together and take the differential of the yardage and move yourself down the field a little bit? That's a conversation for another day. Another guy that had a solid game for himself after Darren Waller took another big shot here. We'll talk about in the offseason. Seems like a mistake. Seems like regardless of what you think he can be when he's healthy, he does not stay healthy. So that's rearing its ugly head again. Good game for Daniel Bellinger. 4 catches on 5 targets, 43 yards, right? Chain mover, 10.8 yards per carry. Year number 2 looks strikingly different than year number 1, but his development can still be there for you. Only 21 catches, just 24 targets, 200 yards on the season for him. Would like to see more of him. Maybe these next 2 games can be a little bit more of the receiving aspect of his game, because I think the Giants want him to be the both and, right? Can do some blocking for you, can stay in line, can make the opportunities available for a Darren Waller, for a Lawrence Cager when he's been out there, for the other wide receivers. But you also want him to be able to be successful like he was a year prior, in spite of having that eye injury, 30 catches on 35 targets in 12 games, right? So I would have liked to have seen him be close to 40 targets on the year, understanding the hierarchy, but would have liked to have seen a little bit more, would like to see him get himself a touchdown on this season as well, had 2 in his rookie campaign. So there's little things out of this that are nice. Disappointed that I didn't see any Eric Gray, though again, it's a competitive game, so you understand that it's not going to be a game where you get a lot of deep cuts here. But, you don't mention Jalen Hyatt anywhere inside of this one. Matt Breida gets a catch in this game. I said this coming into it. I thought maybe it was going to be more of a blowout after the first half. You thought it was going that way. Maybe we would have seen some more from Eric Gray, but there should be some young development here, and we didn't get a full taste of that. You flip it over to the other side. Golly, that play from Bobby Okereke, he has been phenomenal this year. Everybody gets one. He had a pass deflection in this one at 10 total tackles, 8 solo. But when he tries to hold on to that ball to bleed the last 5 seconds off the clock that are going to run off the clock on their own, it's one of those moments. And in that regard, it's like this is indicative of it. The defense, Adoree Jackson, who hasn't had a great year, and prior to this game came out and said, I would love to be back. Feel like there's unfinished business. That's what a lot of players say before they're going to free agency. So they get that both. And I get maybe my organization currently to think about what would that price point look like. I also signal to the fan base, hey, if you want me back, I want to be here, right? It's just saying all the right things. We don't anticipate he'll be back, but he gets a big pick six that keeps the Giants in the game. We get the special teams play that keeps the Giants in the game, gives them the short field, gives them the score. So you got some of those plays that you needed that you didn't get the week prior at all against the Saints to maybe give yourself a chance to beat a team that is better than you. But defensively now, for a couple of weeks in a row, really, we talk about a player like Azeez Ojulari. He had a tackle for a loss in this game, didn't get home, though, on any of his pressures. And really, for a guy that, again, missed some time, but he now has a half a sack. He has a half a sack in what is 7 total games here. And I don't know, one of those may have been the one where he went out. But either way, he's going to play 9 games this season. And we're going to talk about him having under 1 sack. Hasn't been good enough. It was a quiet game for Kayvon Thibodeau, too. I'm not going to really put too much at his feet, given the fact that he's had some really strong games. It is probably a little bit alarming that you talk about him having no tackles. Like that's enough to bother you. Had 1 QB hit. It's like just enough to say, as we get down the stretch here, you still want all your players playing their hardest, giving you everything they got. And I don't question it too much, given that just 2 weeks prior against Green Bay, he had 8 total, 7 for a loss, 7 assists, 1 solo, half a sack. There's plenty of stat lines over the course of his season to be excited about. 11.5 sacks on the year, right? Has 22 assists, has 23 solos, has 45 total tackles, like 3 forced fumbles. There's plenty of stuff that he accomplished here that you're absolutely elated by. And you want to see the full effort all the way down the stretch. But that's, again, a footnote. Deonte Banks goes out of this one. That kind of hurts things for you as well, obviously. And I just thought overall this game was the reminder that this team cannot put together the full game. If you're a Daniel Jones guy, you'd say, well, if Daniel Jones was healthy and he plays the whole game, they win this one. Some people would say if Tyrod Taylor played the whole game, they win this one. Maybe. But it just feels like over the course of this season, you've had big games from the defense that carried this team for weeks. And also in the games when you've gotten more from the offense and the pace kind of quickens up a little bit and you get to those big spots, the defense hasn't been able to get there, right? Swift ends up just basically turning it on here and finding his groove in the second half, complemented by Saquon in the post game, and just kind of finding his rhythm. And the rushing defense has been a problem all year. The final numbers on that side of the ball for Philadelphia, 24-38, 300 yards for Jalen Hurts. He had the pick six that he threw, still ended up with a 67.2 QBR. Rushing, Swift, 20 for 92. Gainwell, 6 for 41. Hurts, 8 for 34. 170 yards given up on the ground, right? And that's not about where you're totally blowing them out and the game's out of hand. That's you coming back in the third quarter, being in a tight ball game in the fourth quarter. You had 15 points in that third quarter. You outscored the Eagles 15-0 in that third quarter. That got you back into this ball game, right? By the end of the third quarter, it's 20-18, and you're battling in the fourth. We get that. But point being is it's a lot easier sometimes when we talk about game scripts and where the teams are and how they're approaching it. 38 pass attempts, 35 rush attempts. This was balanced from Philadelphia. They were able to get the job done in spite of not playing some of their best ball. 6 catches for 80 yards for Brown, 4 catches for 79 for Smith, the touchdown, 7 for 71 for Goddard. That one really just bothered me, not because Goddard isn't one of the best tight ends in the league, and that's fine, but it's just you're getting beat up from every single angle effectively. And Gainwell even kicked in 3 for 38 there as well. So you got carved up when you needed to get carved up. And that's a disappointment if you're just trying to isolate the phases of the game. Not going to get into the punting and Scottish Hammer. Maybe he's hurt, maybe he's not. The big punt return, we know there's all that kind of stuff there. We'll save that for another day. Bottom line is you don't get home in this one. And if you are, depending on which side you fall on here, two trains of thought. If we're talking about Tankathon model and you want the Giants to lose as many games as possible, they did that. And the Eagles also won. The Patriots, New England Patriots also won. The problem there is going to be they play the Bills. Bills have everything to play for, division game. And they're going to follow that up in the final week of the season where the Patriots will take on the Jets. Winnable game there, we all know, but going to be interesting to see. And the Jets, with their win this weekend over the Commanders, which also kept the Commanders ahead of the Giants in the standings with 4 wins, losing 6 in a row. The Jets, even if they were to lose, could create a problem if the Giants accidentally walk themselves into a win against the Rams or maybe against the Eagles. Playoff perspective, not for a Giant standpoint, obviously officially eliminated, but we felt like the game prior against the Saints did that job. The Ravens are the least respected number 1 seed in NFL history. They're 12-3. They beat the 49ers. It's a bad game from Brock Purdy. The Dolphins are right there at 11-4. And then you're just kind of waiting things out. The Chiefs in the West are 9-6. They're still leading that division. The Jaguars, in spite of losing, they're still leading the division at 8-7 as well in the South. And then you get into the 10-5 Browns. You've got the Bills. You've got the Colts 8-7. Even the Texans, the Steelers won a game. Again, talking about should Tomlin be fired. So a ton of 8-7 teams. Even the Bengals, who lost and dropped, really plummeted here, and their playoff chances dropped to 23% to make it. But they're still there at 8-7. Raiders came up 7-8, beating the Chiefs, keeping their hopes alive. Great story for Antonio Pierce. On the NFC side, it really, 49ers maybe take a little bit of a road bump here, but the Lions can get that number 1 seed still at 11-4. We know the Eagles, we know the Cowboys, the Bucks get themselves up in there. They are entrenched right now. 86% chance to make the playoffs. Great story for Baker Mayfield. Rams, Seahawks really bolstered themselves up there, 8-7. Third in the NFC West, but the West is going to be telling a story about who's going to the playoffs for sure. So a lot of narratives being filled there. The Giants are even behind the Bears at this point, who also got a win. We talked about Justin Fields the other day and that prospect. It's just, listen, this ends up kind of being where we thought we would be. And the final note that I found interesting, and I threw this out there on Twitter and got some reactions from it. Generally, it's all positive. Generally, I agree with the sentiment. Brian Daboll's not going anywhere. He's going to be back next year. They need to make key decisions this offseason. We said we were comfortable with that. But that's why winning some of these games mattered. But if you were someone who said they're winning meaningless games, but you believe in Brian Daboll, you needed every one of those 3 wins that you got. Because if you went 2-15, if we assume the Giants don't win another game this year, you have to have a real conversation about letting your coach go. Going 5-12, is that enough? It probably is. You can tell yourself enough of a story here, and playing a close game against the Eagles. Maybe you play the Rams tough and lose another close one. You're probably fine. But those 3, quote, meaningless wins really mattered if you want Brian Daboll to be the guy that's at the helm. And you're still right now, as I said, sitting top 5 in the draft. Small chance that you can get even higher here over the next couple of weeks. Unlikely, but there's at least a small chance that you could still get there. And if we think just about, I mentioned the Patriots, a reminder that the Commanders are going to put themselves in a spot to be playing against. Let's make sure we drill down these guys here. Commanders immediately are going to go up against 49ers coming off a loss in a bounce back spot, and then the Dallas Cowboys. So slim chance you would think that you're going to go ahead and right this ship. If the Commanders are going to do the Giants any favors here and win a game or 2. Giants beat them head-to-head twice. It just creates a really bad spot. So 5 feels like the position for the Giants. You've got the Chargers at 5-10, having lost 3 in a row. You also have the Titans at 5-10. So there are still 2 teams here that you have to watch if you're thinking about where the Giants finish and sneaking out any more wins across this season. But I did find it fascinating. and you believe in Brian Daboll, then you better start believing in meaningless wins. You better start believing that those wins mattered, because without them, we may be having a different conversation right now. We'll come in throughout the rest of this week. We'll start to talk about on an individual level, the player evaluation. Now that we officially, we say, know the Giants are eliminated from the playoffs. What was this season? How are we willing to hang our hat on injury? How much are we willing to say, well, the injuries are what got us? Or is this closer to who this team is than who they were a year ago, making the playoffs, beating the Vikings, and then getting blown out by the Eagles? We'll take a look back at this year's schedule, last year's schedule, and do a little bit of strength of schedule. Where did the wins come from for Big Blue? We'll get into all those things as we push towards the Rams matchup, keeping an eye on the other games around the league and breaking down where we stand on a couple of key players with just 2 games left to go. In the meantime, you get over to YouTube at One Giant Podcast, you get over to Twitter at One Giant Podcast, at Adam Armbrecht, at AndyMac214 on the podcast feed. Wherever you get those needs fulfilled, we'll continue to break down the Giants pushing towards another losing record and another very critical offseason for Joe Schoen and the Giants front office. Until next time, though, as Andrew Mackowitz would want, need, and nay, demand that people know, as always, let's go Big Blue.